The fake police warrant was duct taped to my front door, signed by a judge who's been dead for 3 years. That's how Karen introduced herself. No knock. No greeting. Just a stack of counterfeit authority wrapped in packaging tape, threatening arrest for the crime of unauthorized lawn ornamentation. I stood there holding the paper, reading the bold font like it was a punchline. Comic Sans. She had the gall to use Comic Sans on a felony-level bluff. I scanned the badge logo she'd copy-pasted off the internet. Cropped poorly. Pixelated. It was either a prank or the most pathetic power play I'd ever seen. Then I saw the signature. Judge Ronald P. Harker. I'd attended his funeral 3 years ago. In full uniform. I was one of his pallbearers. I didn't laugh. I didn't get mad. I simply walked back inside, poured a coffee, and opened the drawer in my office desk. The one labeled, "In case idiots try something. I'm the new police chief. Nobody knows yet." My promotion took effect 4 days before I moved here. I didn't announce it to the HOA, didn't list my job on the moving forms, didn't wear the badge. I was trying something radical, peace and quiet with my daughter after 3 years of living inside every murder, robbery, and overdose this county could throw at me. I picked this gated community because the brochure promised enforced harmony. Now I understood what they meant. Later that evening I saw her. Karen. Mid-50s, gold visor, clipboard, walking a tiny dog dressed like a Victorian doll. She waved at me like we were old friends, then pointed to the flamingo I'd stuck in the garden for my daughter's birthday. She mouthed the word violation, like it was a prayer. I waved back. Smiled. Said nothing. 3 days passed. No follow-up from the police. Naturally, because there was no real warrant. But more letters arrived. This time, from the HOA directly. A warning about non-compliant decorative items. Then a fine, $250. Due within 5 days or risk lien placement. My daughter asked why the mail smelled like someone was yelling with a pen. I could have stopped it right there. One phone call to the sheriff, a quick cross-check with the court clerk, and Karen would have been buried in paperwork by morning. But I didn't move. Not yet. You don't set off a siren until you know what fire you're dealing with. Instead, I watched. On Tuesday, the neighbor 2 houses down, a middle-aged immigrant named Mr. Sony, received a notice accusing him of failure to mow in accordance with HOA tempo standards. Tempo standards? What does that even mean? His lawn looked better than mine. But he stood there, confused, holding a bright pink citation that said he had 48 hours to present yard alignment receipts. Wednesday, an elderly couple across the street got a letter threatening eviction over unauthorized fence color. Their fence is beige. Not neon. Not striped. Just beige. I overheard them arguing about how they can't repaint it again, the wood is tired. They didn't say a word about the HOA, just nodded and paid the fine. And on Thursday, I saw the worst one. A single mother, maybe 30, living on the corner lot. She stood outside crying, holding her toddler on one hip, and a letter in the other hand. Karen's newest invention, a court-ordered family safety inspection, set for the following Monday. No court seal. No signature. Just a line that said, "Non-compliance will result in forced child removal as per HOA Code 3B. I made a copy when she wasn't looking. The line at the bottom made my jaw clench. This notice is supported by local enforcement. My department. My badge. I waited until nightfall. Sat in my office with the documents spread across the desk. The forgery was beyond amateur. Typos, misaligned headers, even a coffee stain Karen must have missed. But the damage was real. People were paying. Crying. Moving out. I pulled up my secure laptop and started typing. Every HOA violation. Every fraudulent letter. Every reference to a non-existent code. I documented them all. I flagged the dead judge's signature. I matched stamps from different, official, notices and found that they were all printed with the same $12 rubber stamper from Office Depot. I checked the municipal database. The reference case numbers didn't exist. Most followed the same pattern: Karen ######. Karen's initials. At midnight, I walked down to the mailbox and retrieved the next day's mail. Another one. This time addressed to me. Final enforcement warning. I smiled. The envelope trembled in my fingers, but not from fear. From excitement. The next morning, I took my daughter to school and returned to see Karen at the corner, barking orders to a man in a reflective vest. She handed him a clipboard and pointed at the Ramirez family's garden gnome. He nodded. Took a photo. I watched as he quietly removed the gnome from their lawn and placed it into the back of his truck. I noted the license plate. Then I returned to my office and wrote the following words in my report. Pattern of unauthorized property seizure. Karen wasn't just a busybody. She was impersonating legal authority, distributing falsified documents, threatening children, and weaponizing HOA policy to clear out families she didn't like. It was discrimination wrapped in stationery. And now it was my jurisdiction. But I still didn't knock on her door. I didn't flash the badge or issue a warning. Not yet. Because the trap had to close all the way. I needed more than outrage. I needed evidence. Audio. Digital trails. Witnesses. I needed her to believe she'd won, so that when it collapsed, there'd be no way out. That night, I drafted one last report. I saved it in an encrypted folder and titled it Karen's Law. Not official yet. But if I had my way, it would be. Because in a neighborhood like this, justice wasn't loud. It was patient. Silent. Building. And when it hits, it doesn't knock. It walks in through the front door. Karen held court at the HOA like a dictator in a visor. She didn't need approval, she issued decrees. One woman got a $500 fine for parking too close to her own driveway. Another got hit with a noise violation for letting her dog bark during a thunderstorm. People paid, not because they believed it was real, but because they were tired. Tired of the threats. The notes. The humiliation. That was the game. Keep them afraid, keep them quiet. I didn't pay. I watched. At the next meeting, I sat near the back, unassuming. Karen stood front and center like it was a courtroom drama. Clipboard in hand. She waved around a printed spreadsheet titled Behavioral Incompatibility Incidents. No one blinked. They were used to it. She started reading names. Accusations flew: excessive grass length, unregistered paint tones, porch furniture that didn't match neighborhood themes. Every time someone tried to speak up, she overrode them with, "That's not on the agenda." She controlled the mic, the timer, the votes. I recorded everything. She didn't know I had a voice-activated recorder in my pocket. She didn't know the guy she handed a voluntary compliance citation to was a sworn officer trained in interrogation analysis. Her voice didn't tremble. She believed every word she said. The next morning, I began my route. Not as police chief. As a neighbor with questions. A friendly face, asking about garden tips and mailbox regulations. But every conversation circled back to one thing: fear. People whispered her name like she was an urban legend. Some showed me their citations, each one more absurd than the last. A father of 3 was threatened with eviction over the color of his grill cover. An elderly woman fined for owning more than one bird feeder. Then came the real turn. I met Mr. Sony in his garage. Kind man. Widowed. Spoke softly. He showed me a letter he'd received last year, stamped Department of Municipal Compliance. It claimed he violated Civic Order 14B for installing an unpermitted solar array. His house has no solar panels. He paid $750. He showed me the receipt. The letter used a real county seal, but the font was off. The email address at the bottom bounced. I traced the phone number to a disconnected burner line. I asked Mr. Sony if he ever got a court hearing. He said no. He was afraid to ask questions. I asked if he still had the envelope it came in. He did. Back at my desk, I examined it. Postmarked locally. But the return address? A P.O. box registered under a fake name, Laura Keeley. I dug deeper. That name didn't exist in the county registry. But the box had one authorized user, Karen N. Wexler, HOA president. 2 decades running. No one had challenged her. They tried once. Someone tried to form a reform committee. The next week, their fence was declared structurally unstable, and the HOA ordered it torn down. One by one, I built the web. I accessed the HOA's bylaws. Karen had amended them 37 times over 9 years, each time slipping in obscure new clauses. One of them allowed enforcement of external documents aligned with community welfare. That's how she justified the fake warrants. She didn't need them to be real. She just needed them to sound real. Then I checked the citations. Almost all of them had similar numbering systems: HOA KRW001, HOA KRW002. Her initials embedded in the codes. Some were labeled as active enforcement dockets. She used them to bluff authority. The documents looked official: stamps, barcodes, even QR codes. But I scanned one. It led to a stock photo of a gavel. The deeper I dug, the more it reeked of intent. She wasn't just mean. She was methodical. Targeted. The majority of violations went to single parents, immigrants, elderly residents. Families with no resources to fight. She leveraged silence, confusion, and bureaucratic noise like weapons. Then I found the tipping point. One of the neighbors, a woman named Rachel, invited me for coffee. She'd lived here 6 years. She told me about a young family that used to live on Birch Lane. They had a son with autism. Put in a sensory garden. Karen declared it non-compliant landscaping. They received a series of escalating letters, threats, citations, even a fake court summons. They moved within 2 months. I asked if she had any of the documents. She handed me a folder labeled "Don't Trust Karen." Inside were 6 forged letters, all using different formats. One looked like a restraining order. Another mimicked a police incident report. None were real. All used the same phrases I'd seen before. Failure to comply, escalation pending, as endorsed by local law enforcement. She'd used my job, my badge, as a battering ram for her personal vendettas. By this point, I had enough to start formal inquiries. But this wasn't about citations anymore. This was about civil rights violations. Impersonating legal authority. Mail fraud. Harassment. Extortion. I contacted a friend in the county legal office, quietly. I gave him the documents, explained the scope. He called me back within an hour. His exact words: "You're sitting on a racketeering case." That night I couldn't sleep. I watched the porch through the curtains, half expecting another letter. Sure enough, one arrived. Karen in her robe, dog in her purse, sliding a manila envelope into my mailbox at 2:43 a.m. I waited until she was gone, then opened it. It was a second stage notice, threatening mandatory inspection of my home due to suspected unauthorized occupancy. She just accused me, on fake stationery, of being an illegal tenant in my own house. I smiled. She didn't know who I was. Not yet. But she would. And when she did, she wouldn't just regret the letter. She'd regret every name she ever put on one. I watched as Karen strutted around her fortress of paperwork, oblivious to the storm she'd stirred up. She thought she was untouchable. No one had dared challenge her authority in years. She was a queen with a clipboard, ruling over petty violations and imaginary infractions. But it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down on her, and when it did, it would be impossible for her to escape. The next morning, I did something I'd been avoiding for days. I visited the HOA office. The place was rundown, barely functional. Boxes stacked on top of boxes, old filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in years. Karen had created a mess of documents, and labeled them official, and no one had questioned it. But I wasn't just anyone. I was the one person who could see through the layers of lies. I slid into the office with a casual confidence, knowing I'd have to play my cards carefully. I had to blend in. No badge. No uniform. Just a guy walking in with a clipboard. The receptionist barely glanced up, probably too focused on her phone. I handed her a cup of coffee, something small, something disarming. "Karen in today?" I asked, my voice low and nonchalant. "Yeah, she's in her office, busy as usual," the receptionist muttered, barely looking up. "You know, the usual paperwork. Her kingdom of chaos." I smiled politely, thanking her before walking down the narrow hallway toward Karen's office. I paused just outside the door, listening. Her voice was unmistakable, loud, authoritative, completely self-assured. I knocked lightly, not wanting to disturb her too abruptly. "Come in," she called without hesitation. I stepped in, clipboard in hand, trying to suppress the smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Karen didn't look up as I walked in. She was too focused on a pile of paperwork. "Can I help you?" she asked, still not bothering to meet my eyes. She always had that smug superiority in her tone, as though everyone who crossed her path was beneath her. I cleared my throat. "I'm new to the neighborhood. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about some of the bylaws you guys have. Seems like there's a lot to keep track of." Her eyes flicked up to mine, narrowing slightly. "New? Don't tell me you're one of those people who can't follow the rules." I didn't flinch. No, just trying to understand the rules better. I'm a stickler for details." I gave her a small, disarming smile. "I've heard you've been pretty busy making sure things stay in line around here." That seemed to relax her a little. Karen leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You could say that. We have to enforce these things. Otherwise, the whole community goes to hell. We're not a free-for-all like those people down the street." I nodded, playing along, but all the while, I was absorbing every little detail in her office. Old files. Stamps. The kind of office where nothing was digitized, just piles and piles of paper. It was clear she ran this place like a one-woman show. I wondered how long it had taken her to set up this little empire of deception. "Tell you what," I said, leaning forward just a touch. "I'm trying to familiarize myself with everything you're doing. Thought maybe I could help you organize some of this. You know, streamline things a little. Get all this under control." She smiled, like I just complimented her on the best cake she'd ever baked. "That's very kind of you, but I've got it under control. I don't need anyone messing with my system. We do things the right way here." Her words were as hollow as the empty folders on her desk. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I pushed forward. "I noticed something strange, though," I said. "I saw a couple of violations around the neighborhood that didn't seem right. One of them was for a garden gnome, another for an unapproved paint color. And those official letters, they looked odd to me. The stamps didn't match what I've seen in other municipalities. Not even the font. Thought maybe I'd help you get things in line, make sure everything's legal." Karen's eyes flicked to me, finally registering something was off. Her smile dropped just a fraction. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" she asked, her voice colder now. I didn't flinch. "Not at all. Just trying to help." Her posture shifted slightly. She leaned forward, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You don't know who you're talking to. I'm the one who keeps this place in check. Without me, these people would be running around like animals. I'm doing them a favor." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Because from what I'm seeing, you're doing more than just enforcing rules. You're picking and choosing who you want to punish." Karen's eyes narrowed. Her fists clenched slightly, but she held back. For a moment, I thought she might snap, but instead, she leaned back and smiled that fake, practiced smile of hers. "I think you're mistaken," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "Everything I do is for the good of the community. If you don't like it, well, there are other places to live." The threat was subtle, but it was there. I could feel it. "I'm sure," I replied, calm. "But I like it here. It's a nice place. I just want to make sure the right people are in charge. People who actually care about the community." She bristled. But I didn't give her a chance to respond. "I'll leave you to it," I said, standing up. "But I'll be back if I have any more questions. I'd love to help you keep things running smoothly." She didn't say another word as I walked out, but I could feel the tension in the air. I had what I needed. Karen knew she was being watched now. And she didn't know it, but I had just begun my real investigation. The things I had discovered so far were just the tip of the iceberg. Now I had to go deeper. And this time, I'd be using her own game against her. I left the office with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Karen thought she was invincible. She thought she had the upper hand. But soon she'd realize that the only thing I was looking to enforce was justice. By the time the weekend rolled around, Karen was already feeling the pressure. She didn't know it yet, but her grip on the community was slipping. She'd pushed too far. Her intimidation tactics, her threats, had worked on everyone else, but she underestimated one thing: I wasn't like the others. I had a badge, and more importantly, I had the patience to take her down piece by piece. I didn't respond to her latest notice immediately. That's what she expected. Her arrogance had reached a point where she thought she could control everything. When she slipped that final inspection letter into my mailbox, I ignored it at first. But I made a copy. Then I made copies of everything she had sent me. The fake warrants. The forged signatures. I meticulously scanned each one, noting the inconsistencies. The errors. The half-baked forgeries. As I worked through the documents, a thought hit me: Karen wasn't just playing at power. She was using this position for something far more sinister. It wasn't just about control anymore. She had created an illegal money-making scheme. Fines were one thing, but the constant stream of fake court orders and forged police reports? That was her income, her empire. And she'd gotten away with it for years. By Sunday night, I had a plan. A simple one. Make her think she was winning. Make her think she could force me into compliance. I knew exactly how to use her own game against her. I didn't take any immediate action after receiving her letter, but I let my next move marinate. My contacts in the city's legal office and the county clerk's office had already gathered enough evidence. I was ready. But I needed her to make a mistake. I needed her to reach that point of desperation where she'd do something reckless. And when she did, I'd be ready to drop the hammer. On Monday morning, the call came in. Karen had escalated. She'd filed a police report, claiming I was refusing to comply with her orders to allow a property inspection. She alleged that I was obstructing an investigation. My first instinct was to laugh. But I didn't. I kept my face neutral, listening carefully. "Is she serious?" I asked my contact. "Dead serious," the officer said on the other end. "She's telling anyone who'll listen that you're being uncooperative. She's got the whole HOA convinced she's in the right." That was it. I had to move now. I thanked the officer and hung up. Karen had walked right into my trap. She thought she was pulling the strings, but I'd already set everything in motion. I sent an email to the judge's office, requesting an expedited review of the forged documents. I then called a few trusted individuals, people in the department, people I'd known for years. By the time I made my next move, I had everything in place. The investigation into Karen's fraudulent activities was already underway. All I needed now was to make her squirm. The next evening, I walked past Karen's house, trying to keep my pace casual. I could see her from the window, pacing around her front yard, muttering to herself. I'd already gone through the motions of filing the complaint with the city's legal department, but it was her reaction I was waiting for. Would she make a mistake? Would she get nervous enough to try something she couldn't cover up? The phone call came just as I was turning to leave. It was from my contact at the local news station. She sounded confused. "Hey, we've got a bit of a situation here," she said. "Your name came up in a press release from the HOA. They're claiming you've been obstructing their legally mandated duties. You're being accused of something pretty serious. Want to explain what's going on?" I stayed calm. "Keep recording. Do you have a copy of that press release?" "Yeah, but it doesn't make sense. It says the HOA's been trying to work with you, and now they're claiming you're causing a public safety risk." I nodded. It was her typical move: ramp up the pressure, stir the pot. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. "Don't worry about it. Just keep me in the loop. I'll handle it." "Okay, but you should know, they're planning to hold a community hearing tomorrow to discuss the issue. I think they're going to try to put you on the defensive." That was all I needed to hear. This was my chance to publicly expose her. I didn't just want her to face consequences. I wanted everyone to see her for what she truly was. A fraud. A thief. A bully with a clipboard. I made a few more calls. The wheels of justice were already in motion, but I needed her to make the next mistake. And I didn't have to wait long. The hearing was set for the next evening. By the time I walked into that meeting, I could feel the tension. Karen was sitting at the front, her usual smug demeanor on full display. She greeted me with a sickly sweet smile, no doubt expecting me to back down. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I'd waited for this moment. I made my entrance calmly, not drawing attention to myself at first. But the second I stepped into the room, Karen's smile faltered. The whispers around the room grew louder. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know the trap had already been set. "I'd like to address the community," I said, walking to the front of the room. The air felt heavy. The room was full of people who were all caught in Karen's web, scared, confused, uncertain. But now, they were about to see the truth. I turned to Karen, the room silencing in an instant. "You've been manipulating this community for years," I said. "Sending forged documents. Filing fake reports. You've been collecting fines on a system that isn't even legal. And you've used your position to bully people into submission. That ends tonight." The crowd was still. Karen's face paled. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "I've contacted the authorities. I've contacted the media. You'll be receiving the proper legal paperwork shortly." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. I didn't give her the chance to recover. "You thought you could keep getting away with it. But you were wrong." I turned to the audience. "This is your chance to take back your community. To hold her accountable. No more lies. No more intimidation." The shock was palpable. For once, Karen was silent. As I stepped back from the front of the room, I knew it was over. Karen's empire had crumbled. And this time, I wasn't just walking away. I was making sure she paid for everything she'd done. The room erupted into whispers, some of them excited, some relieved. But Karen? She sat frozen, the weight of her actions finally catching up to her. And as I left that room, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The moment Karen tried to make her escape, the room shifted. The crowd of homeowners, once cowed into silence by her constant threats, was now buzzing with energy. She had been exposed. Her carefully constructed facade of authority crumbled in the span of a few minutes, and she knew it. She had thought she was untouchable, but her empire of intimidation was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. I stood back, watching the room react. Some of them were just glad to see her exposed for the fraud she was. Others were scared, afraid of what would happen next. Karen had been controlling this community for too long. But now, she couldn't even muster the words to defend herself. Her usual snappy comebacks were gone. The pitiful attempt at manipulation she had started with had evaporated in the face of real accountability. "Who do you think you are?" Karen spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "You don't have the right to." "I have every right," I interrupted, keeping my voice steady. "You've been using your position for personal gain. You've been collecting money under false pretenses, intimidating people who had no way to fight back. And now the jig's up." Karen's face twisted in disbelief as the room stared at her. She was used to controlling the narrative, but now the narrative was slipping from her fingers. Her tight grip on this neighborhood, her fortress of fines and phony accusations, was crumbling, and there was no one left in her corner. No one except the few puppets she'd pulled along, but even they were beginning to murmur under their breath, unsure of how to back her up anymore. She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't done. "We've had enough of your lies," I said, my voice rising now, more for the room than for her. "You've been stealing from us for years. You've used this HOA as your personal cash cow. You've bullied people out of their homes, forced them into submission, and when they couldn't comply, you turned the screws harder. Well, guess what, Karen? You've been caught." I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her body stiffened. I didn't care. I wasn't here to make her feel comfortable. I wasn't here to coddle her. I was here to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions. "Your fake citations? Your phony court orders? Your threats of eviction? None of that matters now," I continued. "I've sent everything to the authorities. I've contacted the news outlets. They'll be reporting on you shortly. You'll be under investigation for fraud, harassment, and impersonating a legal authority. And if I have anything to do with it, you'll be held accountable for every penny you've stolen from this neighborhood." Karen's face flushed. For the first time, I saw her sweat. She wasn't the powerful force she thought she was. She was a scared little woman who thought she could bully her way through life. But now, it was over. The game was up. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, her voice cracking as she tried to maintain some semblance of control. "You can't do this. You'll ruin everything. You don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly." I cut her off, my gaze steady. "I understand that you've ruined lives. You've made people feel powerless, and I'm not going to stand by and let that continue. You've been using your position to manipulate and control, and now it's time to pay the price." A murmur ran through the crowd. People were starting to speak up. It started with one, then another, and then it was a chorus. Neighbors who had been too afraid to confront her for years were now openly voicing their anger. They were finally speaking out, no longer intimidated by her manipulative tactics. "You've stolen money from us," one neighbor called out, her voice shaking with righteous fury. "You've lied to us for years. Shame on you," another voice rang out. "You made us think we had no choice but to comply with your lies." Karen's face went pale as the tide turned against her. She looked around at the people she had ruled over with fear for so long, and for the first time, she was on the losing side. She was the one who was outnumbered. She had nothing left to hold on to. She backed up, her hands trembling at her sides, but she couldn't seem to find her footing. She thought she could control this situation. She thought she could keep everyone in check with threats and intimidation. But I had turned the tables on her, and now she had nowhere to hide. "You think you can just expose me and get away with it?" Karen shouted, her voice shrill now, panicked. "This is just the beginning. I will—" "No," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the noise. "This is the end, Karen. This is where your reign of terror ends." There was no arguing now. No more fake documents. No more threats. The truth was out. I could feel the weight of it settling over the room, a heavy silence that was filled with the power of justice. I took a step forward, watching Karen retreat, her confidence shattered. The power dynamic had shifted, and she knew it. "You'll be hearing from the authorities soon," I added, my voice cold, but calm. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself." Karen's eyes flickered with a mix of fury and desperation. She glanced around the room, but no one was backing her. No one was buying her lies anymore. Finally, she turned, her heels clicking on the floor as she stormed out, unable to face the consequences of her actions. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence linger. The room was full of people who had been living in fear for far too long. They were starting to breathe again. Starting to feel like they had a voice. And that was all I needed to see. The change had already begun. As the last of Karen's retreating footsteps echoed down the hall, I turned to the room, meeting the eyes of the neighbors who had finally found their courage. "You're free," I said. "And it's about time." They smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of everything that had been done lift from my shoulders. This was just the beginning. The neighborhood was no longer a prison of fear. It was a community again. And as for Karen? She had no idea what was coming next. The aftermath of Karen's collapse didn't hit me immediately. It wasn't a loud victory or some dramatic confrontation. It was quieter than that, like the stillness that follows a storm. She had been so sure of herself, but in the end, she'd walked right into the trap I'd set for her. And now, the damage was done. As I stood there, watching the door close behind her, I could feel the shift in the room. The energy had changed. People were no longer afraid to speak up. They no longer looked to her for permission. They were free. I hadn't expected the crowd to turn on her so quickly. It had been the right call to confront her in front of everyone. The truth was a hammer, and when you hit someone with it hard enough, they couldn't run. Karen had spent so many years manipulating and controlling people with fear, but that was the one thing I knew could break her: exposure. And now, as I took a breath, I realized just how much her reign of terror had affected this neighborhood. People were scared to paint their fences the wrong color, scared to put up decorations, afraid to speak out against her. They lived in constant fear of fines, threats, and fabricated legal action. That was how she kept control, by making everyone feel powerless. Now they didn't feel that way anymore. They were starting to realize their own power. I walked over to the front of the room, where a handful of people had gathered, still processing what had just happened. Some were still shaking their heads, trying to understand what had just transpired. Others were smiling, a look of relief spreading across their faces. One of the neighbors, an older man named Mr. Haskell, walked up to me with a firm handshake. "You did what we couldn't," he said. "We've been sitting here, quietly taking it. Afraid to make a sound. But you showed us that we didn't have to be afraid." I nodded. "That's what she counted on. She counted on you being scared. But now, it's different." His eyes softened. "It's been a long time since anyone stood up to her. I didn't think it was possible." Another neighbor, a woman named Carla, came up next. She had tears in her eyes, but there was a smile on her face. "I've been trying to sell my house for months. I couldn't even get a decent offer because of the fines. But now I can breathe." I clapped her gently on the shoulder. "You don't have to live like that anymore. None of you do." They all gathered around, exchanging words of gratitude, but I could see it in their faces. This was more than just about Karen. It was about something deeper. It was about the freedom to live without fear, the ability to make choices without being dictated to by someone who had no right to control them. It wasn't just one victory. It was a series of small wins that had built up over years. The little things that had piled up, Karen's petty demands, her underhanded tactics, had finally reached a tipping point. And now, they were falling like dominoes. I didn't stick around much longer. The message had been delivered, and the crowd was beginning to disperse, the weight of the moment still sinking in. People were talking to one another, sharing their stories, their frustrations, and now, their hopes for the future. The air was lighter, and I could see that the community was starting to rebuild itself, piece by piece. But there was one more thing I had to do. One last step to make sure the change stuck. I made a call to the local news station. The reporters had been covering the story of Karen's reign for weeks now, though they had mostly focused on the petty complaints and the public's growing frustration. They didn't have the full picture. Not yet. But now they would. I arranged an interview with a local journalist, someone I knew well, and we met the following day. I gave them everything, the full extent of Karen's fraudulent activities, her use of forged documents, her intimidation tactics, and the way she had been extorting money from people under the guise of enforcement. I made sure they had the hard evidence, the forged court orders, the fake citations, the records of all the fines and penalties that had been illegally levied against residents. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a full-blown scandal. The story broke within hours, and as expected, the response was overwhelming. People were outraged. The press picked up on it, and soon the city council was calling for an official investigation. They couldn't ignore this. They couldn't sweep it under the rug. But I didn't need their help. I had already taken action. The real work had been done, and the truth had come out. As the media began to circulate the story, the pressure on Karen mounted. She tried to spin it, of course. She issued a statement saying that the HOA had been misunderstood, and that her actions were in the best interest of the community. But nobody was buying it anymore. The cracks in her armor were too deep. The authorities moved in quickly after that. I knew that everything would be handled from here. The investigation into her was thorough, and within days the city attorney had issued a formal complaint. They uncovered everything: her financial records, her use of fake documents, and the way she had been manipulating people for years. She had no defense. No excuses. Karen Wexler, the so-called queen of the HOA, was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, harassment, and forgery. It wasn't just the fines she had collected, it was the lives she had ruined, the people she had silenced, and the power she had abused for far too long. It was all coming back to her now. As I walked back into my home that night, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because of the victory, but because of what it meant for everyone else. The real battle had always been about taking back control. And now, finally, they could. The neighborhood was free. The weight had been lifted. And that was something I didn't need a badge to appreciate. I looked out my window as the last of the evening sun disappeared. A new day was on the horizon. And it would be one without Karen Wexler's shadow looming over it.